There are over 30 cemeteries dotted around the Gallipoli landscape as permanent tributes to the fallen. For Australians, this cemetery here at Lone Pine holds particular significance. Named for the solitary tree which stood between opposing trenches, this small patch of land saw some of the bloodiest close-quarter fighting of the campaign and resulted in an horrific loss of life. That battle left its indelible mark on ANZAC history. And this commemorative service and memorial honours each Australian who fought and died here, those with no known grave and those who were buried at sea. At Lone Pine, we remember them.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Australian service at Lone Pine. Good morning also to all Australians at home who may be watching this broadcast. We wish you were here with us among the quiet ghosts of Gallipoli to express our eternal gratitude for their sacrifice. We begin proceedings this morning with the readings of epitaphs from the headstones on the Gallipoli Peninsula by Simpson Prize-winning secondary school students from Australia. Lauren Finnerty, William Thomas, Jessica Greenan and Kevin Kim will read the epitaphs, which are a powerful reminder of the tragic impact the death of loved ones in war has on Australian families. This will be followed by a bugle call to mark the beginning of a period of silent reflection prior to the commencement of the service.
Private Norman Welford, 2nd Battalion, 6th of August 1915, aged 21. His name is written in letters of love in the hearts left at home. Private William Strang, 10th Battalion, 25th to the 29th of April 1915, aged 33. Someday we will understand. Private Sydney Matthews, 4th Battalion, 11th of May 1915, aged 23. Someday, sometime, our eyes shall see the face we keep in memory.
Private Claude Kenyon, 4th Battalion, 6th to the 9th of August 1915, aged 25. He is not dead, he is just away. Private Huey O'Donnell, 11th Battalion, 12th of May 1915, aged 16. He sleeps where ANZAC heroes came to do and die. Private John Simpson Kirkpatrick, 3rd Field Ambulance, 19th of May 1915, aged 22. He gave his life that others may live.
Trooper Frederick Cannon, 7th Light Horse Regiment, 7th of July 1915, aged 31. When days are dark and friends are few, dearest, how I long for you. Private Ernest Wellsman, 11th Battalion, 13th of July 1915, aged 26. Peace, perfect peace. Private John Barclay, 8th Battalion, 21st of June 1915, aged 22. I've no darling, now I'm weeping, baby and I you left alone.
Private Thomas Hibbertson, 11th Battalion, 28th of April 1915, age 33. Too dearly loved to be forgotten. Private Arthur Dreves, 3rd Battalion, 5th May 1915, age 28. In loving memory, his son went down, while yet it was day. Corporal Frederick Padden, 4th Battalion, 12th June, 1915, age 31. Time changes many things, but memory like the ivy clings. His mother.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, again, good morning. My name is Major General Mark Kelly, the Repatriation Commissioner at the Australian Department of Veterans Affairs, a very proud Australian, and it is my privilege to be your Master of Ceremonies for this morning's service. First, I would like to acknowledge the veterans among us. If you are a veteran or a serving member of the Defence Force from any country, young or old, would you please stand? Gazalei, Teşekkür ederiz, lütfen ayağa kalkınız. Ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation for their valuable service. Thank you. A special mention also of all our young men and women of the Royal Australian Navy, the Australian Army and the Royal Australian Air Force, the Australian custodians of the ANZAC tradition. Wherever you are serving, we await your safe return. Here, in this very place, where 98 years ago Australian soldiers fought and died, we gather to remember those whose courage, endeavour and sacrifice gave rise to the ANZAC legend. Our service begins with the mounting of the catafalque party.
Catafalque party, kwe, ach. Catafalque party, praise there. Catafalque party, reverse. Catafalque party, slow. Catapult party outwards. Done. Catapult party rest on.
I now invite His Excellency, Mr. Ian Biggs, Australian Ambassador to the Republic of Turkey, to welcome you here.
Welcome to this service commemorating the 98th anniversary of the ANZAC landings and to Lone Pine. In particular, I have the privilege of welcoming guests from Australia, including the Minister for Veterans Affairs and for Defence Science and Personnel and Minister assisting the Prime Minister on the centenary of ANZAC, the Honourable Warren Snowden, the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, Mr Ian Campbell, PSM, Chief of Navy, Vice Admiral Ray Griggs, and members of the ANZAC Study Group from the Commonwealth Parliament, the Parliaments of Western Australia and Victoria, and the Councils of Greater Dandenong, Casey and Wyndham. From New Zealand, the Minister of Defence, the Honourable Jonathan Coleman, and Chief of Air Force, Air Vice Marshal Peter Stockwell. And from the United Kingdom, the Chief of the General Staff, General Sir Peter Wall. And through the Minister of Youth and Sports, His Excellency Mr Suat Kilic, and the Governor of Çanakkale, His Excellency Mr Gungur Azim Tuna, representing the Republic of Turkey, I wish to thank once more the Turkish Prime Ministry, the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, Forestry and Water Affairs, and Culture and Tourism, the Turkish Armed Forces, Gendarmerie and Police, and the other agencies that make these commemorations possible, and the people of Çanakkale province who are so warmly welcoming of so very many Australians and New Zealanders. Diplomatic, consular, and military representatives, Simpson Prize winners, ladies and gentlemen, among the many commemorative services on the Gallipoli Peninsula, Lone Pine is uniquely Australian because between the 6th and the 10th of August 1915, it was the Australian 1st Division essentially alone against the defending Ottoman 16th Division. Much of this peninsula, already wreathed in classical history and legend, was set apart by the Turkish Republic's defining charter, the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne, as an enduring memorial to the sea and land battles of 1915 of the Dardanelles, Çanakkale and Gallipoli. This is one of the score of cemeteries, Allied and Ottoman, where the fallen were gathered and are, when known, named. And this cemetery, marked, of course, by a solitary pine tree, a stone pine, as it happens, is a mass grave of heroes fallen in the last big push of the Allied campaign. For the Australians, the tally of Lone Pine included more than 2,000 casualties, but also 7 Victoria Crosses for valour, because the battle for Bloody Ridge, the Turkish name, had all the horrors of Western front trench and tunnel warfare in this frighteningly constricted space. And what were the objectives? There's an industry among historians trying to answer that question for the First World War as a whole. For the Allied troops fighting here in 1915, the larger objectives included taking Istanbul and knocking the Ottoman Empire out of the war, and securing access to the Mediterranean from the Black Sea for the Russian Empire. Objectives of the August 1915 offensive were to break out of stalemated positions and take the heights. The attack on Lone Pine itself was a feint to draw the Ottoman commander's attention away from attacks on the Sarabaya range and from Suvla Bay. For the Ottoman troops, The objective was defence, and it did not end here. In warfare from the Russian possessions in the Caucasus to the islands of the Mediterranean, and from Mesopotamia to Thrace, it took another 8 years to establish the borders of the Republic of Turkey. For the Australian Imperial Force, battles like Pozières and Passchendaele lay ahead, but here in this little place is where the tradition truly began. And the objectives for us today: to honour sacrifice and courage and resilience and larrikin humour in the face of death, and reconciliation after tragedy as the Turkish Republic's founder Ataturk extended the hand of friendship, and mateship and uncomplicated patriotism and democracy and freedom. But preeminently, our objective is to mourn loss. The Gallipoli campaign as a whole ended with more than 140,000 Allied casualties, mainly British, and at least 250,000 Turkish casualties. We are reflecting on, and no doubt trying to learn from, what the poet Wilfred Owen called the truth untold, the pity of war, the pity war distilled. Welcome to Lone Pine.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now invite Mr. Ian Campbell, the Secretary of the Australian Department of Veterans Affairs, to deliver a reflection.
Today we gather to pay our respects on ground once stained with Australian blood, indeed the blood of men of many nations. Though none of us met the men buried or commemorated in graves and memorials across the peninsula, we can stand in the place of those who did and honour them. On this day every year, we commemorate the many precious lives lost here, as well as the service of those who returned home, many wounded, damaged forever. To this day, we remain in debt for the sacrifices they made. The stories from the campaign, fought here almost a century ago, are etched in our collective memory. None more so than the battle fought here at Lone Pine. When we stand on the ground on which the battle was fought and read accounts from those who served, we can see the story anew. Private John Gamage described the plight of the wounded. The wounded bodies of both Turks and our own were piled 3 and 4 deep. The bombs simply poured in, but as fast as our men went down, another would take his place. Besides our own wounded, the Turks' wounded lying in their trenches were cut to pieces with their own bombs. We had no time to think of our wounded. Their pleas for mercy were not heeded. Some poor fellows lay for 30 hours waiting for help, and many died still waiting. Standing on the ground on which it happened, the horror of such a scene is chillingly clear. Beyond the battles, existence in the trenches were horrific. Men faced the daily onslaught of shells, bombs, bullets, lice, flies, maggots, dirt, blood, wind, snow and rain. Death was a constant companion. In his diary, Eon Idris, an expert sniper in the 5th Light Horse Regiment who would survive the campaign and war, wrote of a friend who was wounded. Poor Bates is shot. Poor old Bates. He came over with me only a few days ago in the Hunt's End. He was water carrying this afternoon. The bullet smashed through the water tins and pierced his stomach. That evening, Idris updated the entry. Poor Bates has died. Only this morning I was joking with him. All too often, men did not have a chance to say goodbye. We are here today in their place, to say goodbye on behalf of the mates they served beside and the friends and the family back home who have never had the opportunity to visit the grave to say their final farewell. We are not the first to say goodbye, and I trust we will not be the last. On 12 June 1923, an article in the Launceston Examiner noted, "This is the 4th service that has been held at ANZAC Beach. At the first in 1919, only an Australian, a Launceston boy by birth, a New Zealander and an English officer were present. Each year the number has increased, but it is doubtful in the light of political events in the future of Gallipoli if ever such a representative and large gathering will be possible on ANZAC. As we have witnessed, it is indeed possible. Here we are, some 90 years later, not only gathering for a dawn service, but also here at Lone Pine to remember and pay our respects. I'm sure that the Australian and New Zealand who fought would never have imagined so many of you would come to pay homage to them. It is hard to see the scars of the battle on this now beautiful place, but we must always remember that many of them, those buried, here rest where they fell. As written on the grave of Private John McAllister, buried only a short distance away in Shrapnel Valley, tread gently on the green grass sod, a mother's love lies here.
Thank you, Secretary. Monsignor Stuart Hall, RAN, the Principal Chaplain of the Royal Australian Navy, will now provide a reading.
A reading from the prophet Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives and release to prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to provide for those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of faint spirits. They will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord to display his glory. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations. For as the earth brings forth its shoots, and as a garden causes what is sown in it to spring up, so the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to spring up before all the nations.
Thank you, Padre. Would you please stand and join the Gregory Terrace and All Hallows Gallipoli Choir in the singing of the hymn, Make Me a Channel of Your Peace.
And
please be seated. I now invite Vice Admiral Ray Griggs, AO, CSC, RAN, the Australian Chief of Navy, to deliver a reading.
It is hard to imagine this beautiful place as a battlefield. The death, disease and destruction that fell upon those who served here thankfully no longer haunts this landscape. The sea and the land around us are filled with places of great significance to Australians, to New Zealanders, to British, to many others, and most of all, to the Turkish people. From Cape Helles to Suvla Bay, from the entrance to the Straits to the Sea of Marmara. In those first few days, as the ANZACs fought to establish a foothold on Gallipoli, there was another story unfolding just a few miles to the east of us. As the crew of HMAS AE2, Australia's second submarine, were weaving their way through the perilous currents and minefields in the Dardanelles. They became the first submarine to break through the Dardanelles. And having penetrated the Straits, AE2 reached the Sea of Marmara on the 26th of April and patrolled those waters, harassing Turkish shipping in an attempt to deter any which might be headed to Gallipoli. The report of AE2's success came at a crucial time, bolstering morale as Allied commanders contemplated whether or not to withdraw after the hard-fought landings. On the 30th of April, following an attack and damage inflicted by the Turkish torpedo boat, the Sultan Hisar, the crew of AE2 were forced to scuttle the boat and surrender. It was a story of great significance for our fledgling Navy and our fledgling submarine force. And while, of course, here at Lone Pine, we stand at another site of great significance in the Australian story of this campaign. It was here on the afternoon of 6th of August that Australians waited for the signal to advance, saying goodbye to mates in the trenches who they knew they might never see again. When the whistles blew, 21-year-old Lieutenant Athol Burrett of the 3rd Battalion, a bank clerk before enlistment, led his platoon to their objective, the trenches in the centre of Lone Pine. He later wrote about his experience of the charge. Here, there, men staggered, crumpled, pitched forward, sagged sideways. Men shouted, men laughed, men groaned. The slaughter commenced from the second we emerged from our trenches. Machine gun and rifle fire came from the direct front and enfilade fire from both flanks. Men fell thickly on the way over. The ordered gravestones that we walk among today give us little insight to the chaos of the battle described by Burrett. But they do tell us something of the cost of the campaign and the waves of grief it caused both here and at home.
Thank you, Chief of Navy. The commemorative address this morning will be delivered by the Honourable Warren Snowden MP, the Australian Minister for Veterans Affairs, the Minister for Defence, Science and Personnel, and the Minister assisting the Prime Minister in the centenary of ANZAC.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a great honour to be standing before you and to give this address. Can I acknowledge Minister Coleman from New Zealand, Minister Klilic from Turkey and Governor Tuna for their cooperation, their friendship and for allowing us to have these ceremonies on this wonderful country. Fellow Australians, friends, We are privileged to stand here together at a place of such extraordinary sacrifice, a hallowed place, a tiny battlefield where 98 years ago Australians fought in one of the bloodiest battles of the Gallipoli campaign. Part of the disastrous August offensive, the attack began late on the afternoon of the 6th of August 1915. Private Charles Scott, a New South Welshman of the 4th Battalion, wrote, "I can tell you it was no joke waiting to get over to go for your life. It made a chap sort of feel seasick as it drew nearer to the charge, and to see mates in front with drawn faces, having perhaps a last handshake. Every old hand knew that if 1 out of 3 got through, they would be lucky. Men swapped positions in the trenches to be by their mates when the whistles blew. They challenged each other to races to be the first into a Turkish trench. But the enemy and his machine guns were waiting. Those who made it through this murderous charge then had to find a way into the covered and defended trenches. Constant fire, screams from the wounded, yelling from those still fighting, dust, smoke, confusion, noise, and silence from the dead. Some began removing obstacles. Others ran on, seeking a way in at the rear of the Turkish position. Yet this charge was only a prelude to a vicious and desperate fight. Inside the trenches, it was hand-to-hand fighting. Facing death, men used knives, spades, fists, feet and teeth if it gave them an advantage. Within hours, the Turkish trenches at Lone Pine were in Australian hands. But this was just the beginning of the nightmare to come. For 3 days, the fearless Turks launched wave after wave of counterattacks to take control of this small space around us here. Imagine, if you can, the chaos, the noise, the smells, the fear, the carnage. Between attacks, both sides hastily erected barricades. They used whatever was available: sandbags, equipment, bodies. There was an almost constant stream of bombs and grenades being thrown. Some men caught bombs in mid-air, throwing them back, or tried to smother them with sandbags or greatcoats as they smouldered on the trench floor. The trenches were full of dead and wounded. Turks and Australians were left where they fell. Chaplain Bill, fighting Mac Mackenzie, wrote, "The trenches were the most awful sight I have ever witnessed. Hundreds of dead Turks, and these intermingled with Australian sons, lay tears deep in some trenches. I had to leave the graves to retch from the effects of the smells." By the time it was over, the 1st Brigade, which had led the assault, had lost more than 2,200 men. In his understated way, Private Bendry from the 2nd Battalion wrote of the battle, "War is hell, absolute, unlimited hell. The papers will say glorious victory. 2nd Battalion captures 3 lines of trench. The real thing should read, we charged in the face of murderous fire, took 3 lines of trenches, losses were heavy." Few witnesses survived to record the countless instances of bravery and sacrifice. 4 of the unprecedented 7 Victoria Crosses awarded after the battle went to the members of the reinforcing 7th Battalion, all men from Victoria. Lieutenant William Simmons, a 26-year-old commercial traveller from Melbourne. Lieutenant Fred Tubb, a 34-year-old grazier from Longwood. Corporal Alexander Burton, a 22-year-old ironmonger from Kyneton. And Corporal William Dunstan, a 20-year-old clerk from Ballarat. Tubb Dunstan and Burton fought together. Under repeated and determined Turkish attacks, they defended their trench despite horrific wounds and a determined enemy. Due to their actions, the exhausted enemy finally yielded the position. After Lone Pine, the 7th Battalion remained on Gallipoli until the evacuation, and then served on the Western Front and fought in many more terrible battles. Few of its original members remained to greet the armistice in 1918. By then, Fred Tubb was dead, killed at Menin Road in 1917. Simmons had been gassed in July 1917 but fought on in the Somme in 1918. And Dunstan, severely wounded at Lone Pine, never returned to the front line. Here and in many other battles fought on Gallipoli, a proud tradition was forged. Forged despite the futility and pointless sacrifice of so many. But even despite this, a tradition that has inspired all of those who have worn the uniform of Australia's armed forces since. The 7th Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment is again serving today in Uruzgan Province, Afghanistan. There is no glory in the horror of war, but we can look to the past, to the sacrifice, to the mateship, the duty and the courage displayed here, and use it to inspire us to do better and to always strive for peace. To recognise in those men and women now in uniform who serve so valiantly with that same sense of service that was a driver for those brave souls who forever rest here, and to all who fought now so long ago, lest we forget.
Thank you, Minister. The Australian Government sponsors the Simpson Prize for secondary school students. The prize honours Private John Simpson Kirkpatrick, the man with the donkey, remembered for his courageous evacuation of the wounded and injured, and whose eternal resting place is at Beach Cemetery, down on the coastline just below us here. I now invite Simpson Prize winner Miss Rachel Hay to recite a poem entitled In Memory of Our Son. The poem was written in honour of Reginald Roy Annesley, who was born in Katoomba, New South Wales. Roy, as his parents called him, was 21 when he enlisted in August 1914. Serving in Gallipoli with the 3rd Battalion AIF, he was killed in action on the 19th of May 1915. His father, David, wrote this poem in 1916 in tribute to his fallen son. Roy is buried in the 4th Battalion Parade Ground Cemetery here on the peninsula.
Brave and true, we'll remember you, as long as life may last. You did your best among the rest of your comrades in the past. You heard the call and gave up all, in this world that you held dear, to go and fight both day and night, for your brave heart knew not fear. Our eyes are wet, for we can't forget that goodbye on the train. 'Twas the last goodbye. You said, "Don't cry, I'll come back all right again." You'll hear from me when I'm on the sea, and no matter where I land, you will know your lad will do nothing bad to disgrace his native land. He kept his word, for we'd often heard from our boy across the sea of the work he'd done under Egypt's sun, getting fit for Gallipoli. One day he wrote just a tiny note, which we'll cherish till we die. He said, "We've sailed, and this note I've mailed on a ship that is passing by." He got to the front and stood the brunt of battle fierce and hot. He was in the race, the Turks to his place, and into their trench he got. The day they won, we knew what they'd done, but alas, when the roll was called, each brave little lad that in khaki was clad just stood there like statues, appalled. But now all is over, we'll never see more our brave little soldier boy. Far, far over the sea, on famed Gallipoli, lies our dear little soldier son Roy. Though he lies far from home, his spirit will roam back to the land he loved well, and will whisper, Dear Dad, be proud of your lad, for he fought for his country and fell.
Thank you, Rachel, for a wonderful reading. Principal Chaplain Hall will now offer a prayer for the Australian Defence Force.
Lord God of hosts, we pray for the current serving members of the Australian Defence Force. Give them all courage and comfort in danger, patience in waiting, and discipline in the just use of force. As we are faced with the continuing threat of an uncertain world, fraught with the reality of evil and suffering, give them that commitment to their nation's welfare that has inspired members of the Australian Defence Force for over a century. Keep them from cynicism and pessimism that can undermine their commitment and morale. In all their service, enable them to give and not count the cost, to fight and not heed the wounds, to toil and not seek for rest, to labour and not seek any reward save that of knowing that they do your will. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Monsignor Hall. Wreaths will now be laid by official representatives. The first wreath will be laid by the Honourable Warren Snowden MP on behalf of the Government and the people of Australia, accompanied by Captain Julian Honan of the Australian Army and Cadet Under Officer Fleur Alexander. The next wreath will be laid by His Excellency Mr. Suat Kilic, Minister for Youth and Sport, on behalf of the Government and the people of the Republic of Turkey. The Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman MP will lay a wreath on behalf of the Government and the people of New Zealand. On behalf of the Republic of Austria and the People's Republic of Bangladesh, Ms. Doris Danler and His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Zulfikar Rahman. On behalf of Canada, the French Republic, the Federal Republic of Germany, Hungary and the Republic of India, His Excellency Mr. John Holmes, Mr. Bernard Chapdelaine, Dr. Thomas Kurtz, Dr. Zoltan Feyer and Colonel Anil Kumar Pandya. On behalf of Ireland, the Republic of Lebanon and the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Kiernan, His Excellency Mr Mansour Abdallah and Air Commodore Shafqat Mushtaq. On behalf of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America, Brigadier Sudath Pereira, His Excellency Mr David Redaway, CMG MBE, and Mr Scott Kilner. On behalf of the Defence Forces of Australia, New Zealand and the United Kingdom, Vice Admiral Ray Griggs AO CSC RAN, Air Vice Marshal Peter Stockwell AFC and General Sir Peter Wall KCB, CBE, ADC. On behalf of the Government and the people of Victoria, the Government and people of Western Australia and the Federal Court of Australia, the Honourable Richard Dalla Riva MLC, the Honourable Robin McSweeney MLC and the Honourable Shane Marshall. The final wreaths will be laid on behalf of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and Australian and New Zealand veterans by Mr Keith Simpson MP, Rear Admiral Ian Crawford AO RAN retired and Brigadier Rick Otway MBE retired. We now reflect and honour those who served and died here and in all wars and conflicts. Please stand for the ode, which will be followed by the last post, 1 minute silence and rouse. The ode will be recited by able seaman Justin Prasad of the Royal Australian Navy.
They went with songs to the battle. They were young. straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catapult party present. Catapult party shoulder.
Please remain standing for the national anthems of Turkey and Australia. I now invite Principal Chaplain Hall to offer a final blessing.
May the Lord bless us and keep us. May the Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious to us. And may the Lord turn his face towards us and our nation Australia and give us peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Padre. Please be seated. We began our service this morning with the mounting of the catafalque party, and now the catafalque party will be dismounted.
Catapult party in words. Hunt. Catapult party cry. Out. One team. Hunt.
We will now commence the laying of floral tributes by other guests and members of the public. The first wreath will be laid by the Honourable John Pandazopoulos, Member of Dandenong, Parliament of Victoria, on behalf of the ANZAC Study Tour, followed by Mr Lee Talamas of the Parliament of Victoria on behalf of the ANZAC Study Tour, Mr Graham Leonard Ashton on behalf of the Victorian Police, Mr Hussein Mustafa on behalf of the Turkish community in Victoria and the Victorian Multicultural Commission, Mr Todd Codd and Mrs Tanya Codd on behalf of the Gallipoli Memorial Club, Caitlin Baljak and Beth Downing on behalf of the ACT Chief Minister's ANZAC Spirit Prize, Neil Wharton and Wendy Flory on behalf of St Joseph's Gregory Terrace and All Hallows School, Bridget Hoey and Brianna Ginman on behalf of the Hoey family, Brisbane, Jack Castle Burns and Taylor Cosentino of the Simpson Prize winners 2013, Christy Elam and Alex Smith of Conservation Volunteers 2013, Phil Everton of the Carsill RSL sub-branch, Philip Jones of the Edenvale Chelsea RSL, Samantha Burrow of London Legacy, Warren Edwards and Sharon Edwards of the Edwards family in memory of Trooper Norm, Mr Glenn Reid of the Australian War Memorial, John Byland, Harris Sanford, Kaya Pike, Megan Swindle, Rab Jones and Jake East of the Collie Senior High School, Western Australia, Peter Traherne, Melanie Traherne and Keith Traherne on behalf of Keith Traherne. Next wreath laid on behalf of the Glenroy RSL and the Roxburgh, Hume and Penola Colleges. Captain Kurasidius and Lieutenant Garnet Sparks of Operation Paladin, Emma Carney and Jack Graham of the Queensland Premier's ANZAC Prize, Gulay Seligdogd and Mohammed Ganabalat from Sirius College Dandenong, Daniel Bell and Caitlin McNabb of the Sirius College, Marta Christie College, St Joseph's College, Melbourne. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our service here at Lone Pine. Walk softly in this special place. We are among friends now who honour and respect the sacrifice that occurred here as we do. Remember that wherever you walk, you are standing on the remains of our ancestors. Tread softly. Thank you.